Let's tackle a question that, on the surface, seems to have a really obvious answer. How could a country like Iran possibly stand a chance in a war against the combined power of the United States and Israel? Well, the reality is way more complicated, and it's actually a fascinating look at how a weaker power can completely flip the script.
I mean, just look at the stats. On paper, this isn't even a contest. You've got Goliath over here, the USA and Israel, with astronomical defense budgets, the most advanced aircraft in the world, and, nuclear weapons. And then you have David, Iran, whose economy has been hammered by sanctions, flying planes that are decades old with a totally conventional arsenal. The gap is it's staggering.
So that's the big question, right? How could this possibly end in anything other than a quick, overwhelming victory for the US and Israel? The answer is pretty simple, actually. Iran has absolutely no intention of fighting the war that its enemies are prepared for.
Yeah, instead of trying to go toe-to-toe, strength against strength, which would be a disaster, Iran has spent the last 40 years building its own version of a slingshot, a whole military doctrine based on asymmetric warfare. It's designed from the ground up to neutralize a more powerful, technologically advanced enemy.
And this whole strategy was born from just watching. Iranian leaders saw what happened in 1991. And then they saw it happen again in 2003, when the U.S. military basically took apart Iraq's army in a matter of weeks. The lesson they took away from that was crystal clear. If you try to fight America head-on, you are going to lose badly.
So this led to a strategy you could call mosaic defense. And here's the key thing you have to understand. The goal is not to win some big, decisive battle. It's to survive. It's to endure. It's to make the war so costly, so bloody, and so politically painful that the stronger side just gives up.
Okay, so what are the actual stones in this strategic slingshot? Well, the very first one is all about some truly nightmarish math for anyone trying to plan a defense.
You see, Iran's military power isn't just inside its own borders. They've built up this huge network of proxy forces all over the Middle East. And these groups aren't just allies, they're basically a distributed arsenal. You add up all the rockets and missiles from groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and others, and you're looking at a jaw-dropping total of over 200,000 projectiles.
And to put that number in perspective, just one of those groups, Hezbollah, is believed to have around 150,000 rockets, all by itself. That's more firepower than many major NATO countries have in their entire active stockpiles.
And this is where the math gets brutal for the defenders. A cheap, simple rocket that might cost, say, $800 has to be shot down by a super sophisticated interceptor missile that can cost anywhere from $50,000 to over $2 million. You can't win that economic fight. You're basically spending a fortune to stop pocket change, and over time, that just completely drains you. We actually saw a preview of this strategy back in April 2024. That big attack from Iran? It was less about doing damage and more about being a live-fire test. It forced Israel and the US to use up a huge number of those incredibly expensive interceptors. Now imagine that not as a one-night event, but as a constant barrage, day after day from all directions. The whole point is to just empty the defenders' stockpiles.
All right, on to the next stone in the slingshot. And this one is all about using the map itself as a weapon.
The US has a whole bunch of military bases scattered across the Middle East, and every single one of them, with tens of thousands of American troops, is well within range of Iranian missiles. From a strategic point of view, they're basically sitting ducks.
And the objective here isn't to win a big battle against these bases. It's political. Iran knows that public opinion back in the United States is a huge vulnerability. If they can cause American casualties, it could easily spark a political firestorm in Washington, fuel anti-war movements, and create massive pressure to just pull out.
Then there's the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow channel is, without a doubt, one of the most critical spots on the planet for the world economy. Think about this. 20%, a fifth, of the entire world's daily oil supply has to pass right through it, and it's right on Iran's doorstep.
So Iran doesn't need to defeat the entire US Navy here. All they have to do is create enough chaos with sea mines, swarms of small boats, or coastal missiles to disrupt the flow of oil tankers. The second that happens, global oil prices would skyrocket, creating a massive economic shock. And that would create intense international pressure on the US to end the conflict on pretty much any terms, just to get the oil flowing again.
Now, the next stone isn't physical at all. We're talking about the silent, invisible, and incredibly disruptive world of cyber warfare.
Iran has been on the receiving end of major cyber attacks, so you better believe they poured resources into their own offensive capabilities. In a real conflict, they could unleash chaos against the critical infrastructure we all rely on. Just imagine the impact, not just financially, but psychologically, of an attack that shuts down power grids, messes with water supplies, or crashes financial markets. This kind of warfare doesn't target tanks. It targets the public's will to fight.
But maybe Iran's biggest advantage isn't a missile or a computer virus at all. It's something much simpler. The ability to weaponize time itself.
And this gets at a really fundamental difference between the two sides. Western democracies like the US and Israel, they need wars to be short and decisive. They're incredibly sensitive to casualties, and they have to deal with constant pressure from the public and a free press. Iran's government, on the other hand, is built for the long haul. It can absorb a level of pain and sustain a long, grinding conflict in a way that is just politically impossible for its enemies.
So when you put all these pieces together, it forces us to completely rethink what winning would even mean in a war like this.
Look, winning for Iran doesn't look like an Iranian flag flying over the White House. It doesn't mean destroying the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Winning for them is simply surviving. It's about bleeding the enemy with 1,000 little cuts, making the human cost, the financial cost, and the political cost so unbearably high that the other side finally decides it's just not worth it anymore and goes home.
And that kind of leaves us with this one really important thought. It's a powerful reminder that history isn't just decided by who has the best weapons. It's often decided by who is willing to endure the most for the longest. And in that kind of contest, the outcome is never as clear-cut as it looks on paper.